All right, continuing in our video series for CSS, our next bullet point here we're gonna focus in on is understanding the CSS style rule. In this video here that code.org put out, they did a really good job with kind of helping us understand how CSS intersects with HTML and the various properties and how they affect the rendered output of our code. But what I want to do is I want to walk through just a basic example of using a few properties to style our tags or style our elements. And so here's an example of the A tag where it uses the background color property and we give it the value yellow. Now I like this graphic here because it gives you kind of a visual of all the terminology, or it gives you some terminology and also kind of descriptors of what each part of this style rule entails. So for instance, this opening bracket here is the declaration start, right? This closing bracket here is the declaration end. But then this property, which is highlighted in blue, can take multiple values. Here's another breakdown of a style rule where we have a selector, and then some of our future videos we're going to talk about all the different types of selectors we can utilize. But here we have the property, which is color, and then the value, which is red. Now this whole thing here, both the property and the value, is considered a declaration. And so a style rule can have multiple declarations, right? So if we wanted to, we could say H1 has, currently it has a declaration, one declaration, but if we wanted to, we can say background color blue. If we put background color blue and we have color red, then it would have two declarations. So real quick, let's go ahead and actually test some of this out and then kind of see how CSS intersects with HTML and how we can target certain HTML elements. Before I do that here, before I switch screens here, let me just talk about this here. Like I said, this is another view of a breakdown of a declaration in which you have the property, which is color, and then you have the value, which is red. And also properties can take multiple values, and those values can be different formats. So for instance, this is the name of the color, which is red, but also it could take a hexadecimal color code. It can take an HSL color code or RGB. And so part of what you need to study for the various properties is what values are permissible and what values can we apply to a property. So let's just do a quick example of writing some style rules that would target some of our HTML code, and then we'll end this video here. So what I'm using is a code playground called codepen.io. So if you do want to refer back to this example, you can go to this URL. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write a div tag here, and within my div tag I'm going to have a H1 that says introduction to CSS, and I'm going to close off my H1, and then I'm going to have a paragraph tag. This is a short video on how to apply CSS to HTML. And I'm going to close off my P tag, and then ultimately I'm going to close off my div tag with a / div. So here's my HTML. I've given structure to my text, and what I want to do now is I want to apply some CSS. So the first thing we want to do when applying CSS is to figure out what do we want to target within our HTML code. So we have H1, we have a paragraph tag, and the way that we would target certain items within our HTML code, we can do that a number of different ways. One of the simplest ways is to target each of these various elements by their tag name. And in CSS, that's called a type selector. So in this video, I'm going to only go over a type selector, but there's many different types of selectors that we can use to target our HTML code and give presentation. So for instance, how would you do this within CSS? You would give the name of the selector, or give the name of the HTML element. In this case, it's H1. So that would be the first thing you want to do. And then the syntax of a style rule here is that you give the selector, which in this case is H1, and you have to give the opening and closing bracket. In this case here, I'm going to give this H1 two declarations. One is going to be the font size. I'm going to change the size of introducing to CSS. So keep your eyes on this text here. And I'm going to say the font size is going to be 3 EM. Now, you may not understand kind of the measurement units here. We're going to get into that at a later time here. But just know that there's many different measurement units we can use. There's absolute and there's what we call, absolute and relative measurement units that we can apply to the various values that we specify for our property values. So we changed the font size here. That text grew to reflect 3 EM. And 3 EM is really the horizontal measurement of the letter M for that particular language. So EM is a relative measurement unit. Like I said, more to come on that. And we're going to give it another declaration. So let's give this here a color. And we're going to say olive, olive drab. Is that a color? Yeah, it is, right? And so it's this nice green color that we can apply to it. And one of the things that you want to study here is what are all the different values that a property can take, right? And so in this case here, we give it the name olive drab, but we can also give it the name, or we can give it a hexadecimal and say CD 0000 and turn this to like what we call an Under Armour red. And so it could take a hexadecimal, it could take an RGB value. But like I said, that's part of what some of the studying we need to do in terms of what values are permissible for the various properties. I'm going to turn this back to olive drab, and I'm going to do one more example here. I'm going to target the paragraph tag, and I'm going to give this one here two declarations. One is going to be the font weight, and let's change the font weight. And the font weight property has to deal with the density or the boldness of the font. And one of the values you can give it is bold, bolder, or bold. Yeah. So we could say bolder, right? And you'll see that the text is now bolder. Or you can give it a numeric value. And if I wanted to, you can give it 100, 200, 100, 300, 500, 900. In this case, I can give it 900, and it'll do something very similar to what the bolder would do for this particular example. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give my text a text shadow, and the text shadow property takes 4 different values. The first value is the vertical alignment of the shadow, and so we'll say 2 pixels. The second value is going to be the horizontal alignment of the shadow, so we'll say 5 pixels. And then the third value is going to be how the density of, or not the density, but the how the shadow would display. And so the blur effect, if for lack of better words. And so let's give the blur effect 10 pixels. And then the last value for text shadow is going to be the color. And so in this case here, we can give it a dark gray. So we can say AA. And then every, what we consider every declaration has to end with a semicolon. So you'll see that right now in my P tag, I have 2 declarations, but be careful to make sure you close off each declaration with a semicolon. Again, if I wanted to, I can change the values here and you'll see how it affects. And so, like I said, the second position here is the horizontal measurement. And if I were to increase that to 20, the shadow would show all the way to, second value is the vertical alignment. And then I can change this here. This is the blur effect, and say the 3 pixels. And you'll see that now my shadow is showing beneath the text here. But in this case here, let's change this back to about 7 pixels. And that way that shadow will show kind of a little bit beneath the text there. Again, this is a quick example of how to target our HTML, target certain elements within our HTML code and apply some presentation. In this case, we're given some declarations for each of the type selectors. And so the simplest and most basic selector is the type selector, and the type selector is essentially the name of the element that you want to target. Last thing here before I end this video is that if you do a type selector, this applies to every element that has that selector, or every element that has that name. So if we do another paragraph tag, say this is another paragraph. Well, actually, I already have another paragraph, right? So this is another paragraph, but this here is reflective for this style rule here is going to basically be applied to all the paragraphs that will be found within an HTML document. All right, before I end this video, our next video is going to talk about where does the CSS exist within our file structure. So we're going to talk about 3 different ways of implementation of CSS. So this coding playground, it's kind of hard to figure out, okay, we have these style rules, but where do they actually go in our project file structure? And so I'll talk about the 3 different ways of implementation, internal, external, and inline. But if you do want to refer back to this example, feel free to use this coding playground URL, and you can always have access to this code here. All right. All right, one last thing here before I close out this video. I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint slides here. And it's this idea of writing clean CSS code. And so it gives 2 examples of 2 style rules here. One is they both do the same thing, but one is they're both correct, but one is harder to read. And so in this class, what I would like for you to do is to place 1 declaration per line. And this is a little bit cleaner, right? Yes, this would work if you would have placed all the declarations on 1 line. It would work. It is not necessarily a standard, but a good coding practice would be to give a declaration per line. So you can have multiple declarations per style rule, but I would say a good coding practice is to put all those declarations on its own line. And that's it. And so you'll see that I've done that here in this video, where font size declaration is on its own line, as well as the color and so forth.